In the Turkish city of Adana, these Syrian refugee children are receiving Turkish lessons, thanks to a scheme funded by the UN, the EU, the Red Cross and the Turkish government. Their families receive cash every month, so their children can stay in school and follow their ambitions. But there are now more than 3.5 million Syrian refugees in Turkey, and it's taking its toll on the government's resources.
Our country can no longer carry this burden alone. If you ask what we got from the European Union, let me give you the answer. The European Union promised us 3 billion euros and another 3 billion euros for the year 2015, but only 3 billion euros were given to us. Whenever we meet, they say that is about to come, but nothing has come yet. Whether it comes or not, we have to support those people who fled from barrel bombs, seeking refuge in our country.
8 years of war and destruction in Syria has left Turkey the largest refugee hosting country in the world. It's hosting 2 million more than the second largest, Pakistan. Delegates here at the United Nations will be exploring ways in which the responsibility for looking after refugees can be shared, how they can be supported in their host countries to make a positive contribution, and how support can be given when it's time to return home. Turkey has already been exploring ways of how to do that, pushing the European Union for more support, also through talks with the United Nations and involvement at the forum.
But the purpose of the meeting of this conference is not just to talk, but also to rally international support for countries hosting refugees in a spirit and with the objective of sharing this burden more equitably.
Turkey also wants more support for its plan for northeast Syria, where it plans to resettle up to 2 million refugees and rebuild infrastructure, but that's proving far more controversial. It's faced accusations of trying to bring about demographic change in the area. The Turkish government says people have already fled because of the YPG terror group. Now officials are working with the UN on the plan and say that conditions will be made safe and that no one will be forced back home. Andrew Hopkins, TRT World, Geneva.
Well, for more on this, Andrew Hopkins joins us now from Geneva. Hi, Andrew. Let's just look at the numbers for a second here. They're quite staggering, aren't they? We've got 71 million people displaced around the world. 26 million of them are refugees. And as you mentioned in your story, more than 3 million of those are here in Turkey. Tell us more about this first Global Refugee Forum. Who's there exactly and what do they hope to achieve?
Well, what we've got here is we've got senior politicians, we've got business leaders, we've got foundations, we've got charities. And what they hope to achieve over the next couple of days is find ways of sharing responsibility for looking after the refugees who are in very difficult circumstances in various locations all around the world. These politicians and other leaders, they're going to be sat in the same room discussing various projects, discussing various ideas they have, perhaps ideas that have worked in other countries and then can be transferred to others. And they're looking at ways in which they can cooperate. And this is something that, that Turkey has been trying to sort of push home with the international community for quite a number of years now. As you mentioned there, 3.7 million Syrian refugees in Turkey's borders at the moment. And Turkey says it spent something like $40 billion on looking after them in the past few years. Many projects, if you go to various cities around Turkey, you can find where things like training centres for people wishing to enter the employment market in Turkey, special classes for refugee children, also health centres which give special treatment for refugees, also therapy. These Syrian refugees having experienced some very horrific, terrible situations when they were back in their home country. Many of these projects funded by the Turkish government, but also people like the European Union and the United Nations. But as Turkey tries to keep emphasising, this isn't a bottomless pit of money, and everybody needs to club together, and Turkey itself needs more support.
It's also interesting that there's a contingent of business leaders at this Global Refugee Forum. We normally associate the refugee crisis as something that governments or NGOs have to deal with. But why are business leaders there? Is there a role for the private sector in this humanitarian issue?
Well, I think there is, and the United Nations certainly think there is. There are some quite famous global brands represented here. We've got Vodafone, we've got IKEA, and we've got Lego, and they all run charitable foundations which they run projects and give money to help people in more unfortunate circumstances all around the world. And these companies have got their representatives, their senior managers here, and they're going to be sat in the same rooms as those politicians and other organisations. Some of these meetings are going to be held in public, in which they're going to be talking about what they're involved in, how they can swap ideas and how they can cooperate in future. I think you can say that some of these companies, they genuinely do want to help some of these people in difficult circumstances around the world, but I think also you could argue that by doing this they also help market their brand around the world, give it a much better image, rather than for some of the companies ploughing their profits back into shareholders and senior management. And we've already had a couple of announcements also from these companies at this forum. We've had from Lego, they've pledged $100 million for play-based learning in East Africa. From Vodafone, they say they're going to digitally connect up to 500,000 refugees at various locations around the world, and also 20 international law firms say they're going to donate 115,000 hours of their time pro bono, so that's free of charge, to help represent refugees and cover refugee issues.
Okay, interesting. Andrew Hopkins, we'll see how the forum unfolds over the next 2 days, but thank you so much for that update.